Welcome to another episode of Chad's Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Chad's Training and Consulting. If you'd like your company announced during our podcast introduction in the future, consider sponsoring our podcast transcript. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as director of training solutions and principal at Chad's Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm director of media productions here at Chad's Training and Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So if you want your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org and get some more information. The people over there are great. We are excited to be advocates of that organization.
For sure.
Chad, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. The weather here in the Northeast has gotten a bit fall-like.
Yep.
And it's very lovely. So it's my favorite time of year.
It's raining here as we speak. Hey, I heard you got a package in the mail this week.
I did. A really super good friend of mine, a super generous friend of mine, sent me a Cuban coffee maker. And
sounds like a great guy.
He is. Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it. So I actually made Cuban coffee this morning. It's one of my favorite types of coffee. I usually get it like when I'm in Miami, but now I can make it here, which is super
Did you
cool.
watch a YouTube video to learn how to do it?
I sure did. Yeah. I was watching that this morning. I'm like, I could do this, so super cool. Thank you, buddy.
Awesome. Always happy to make dreams come true and making dreams come true in the world of accessibility. I actually had a call with someone who uses Access PDF and Access Word yesterday. Actually, it was this morning, and they're in Australia, so it was like 3 a.m. And I am that guy. I'm up sometimes.
You are.
Yeah. But they were worried. They were trying to figure out, how do I use Access Word to do complex tables? And then how does that translate to Access PDF? And the long and short of it all, because it's a little hard to explain visual things over a podcast. But when you're using simple tables inside Word, using Access Word, you can set up your columns and rows to have the proper scope. But the complex table association is a little harder to set up, and it takes more time. If you have Access PDF, it's always better just to leave your complex tables to go work on it in Access PDF, because in literally 5 seconds, you can do really complicated tables by just click, and all of a sudden you've set all the cell IDs. I know you and I previously, our solution to this is go into the tags tree and restructure all your TDs and make a new first column and all this extra work. But boy, man, Access PDF sure makes that job literally 5 seconds. So
it really does.
I was able to help her out.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, Dax, like, I honestly don't care what tool you use. Right. I mean, now to be fair, we're kind of limited. It's not like we've got 20 applications to choose from. Right. But, whether it's Common Look, whether it's Access PDF, Access Word, I think having the tools in your tool belt gives you the opportunity to make good decisions.
Right.
During the process, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
and you and I are going to talk about something similar in a few minutes, but I know anymore when I'm remediating a document, I kind of look at my options.
Right.
I'm like, okay, well, I could do this, but you know what? This way would be a heck of a lot faster. And I think it just helps me. I think it helps both of us make just good choices on how to approach solving the problem, and I like having those choices.
And once you get past the idea of, okay, what do I need to do to make it compliant? It's kind of like painting a picture, right? There's a lot that goes into painting a picture. you've got to stretch the canvas. You've got to pre-process the canvas by adding whatever substrate goes on there, and then, get all your paints ready and figure out what your colors are. You've got all this work to do before you ever start actually being creative.
Yeah.
And then you're worried about dry time and am I mixing this color with that? There's all these other considerations. And I feel like that's a lot like accessibility. Mm-hmm. When you first start out, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got the tags tree and the read order and did I artifact the right things? And once you get past a lot of that, once all of that starts to become automatic, you can make more purposeful design choices in how you remediate. And I did say design choices, because as much as you might want to think accessibility or tagging documents is programmatic and it's some kind of automated thing, there really is a style and flavor to it. And you're the one in control a lot of the times as to what that user experience can be like or what options they have. Somebody just in our Facebook group the other day posted about a back to top button in the PDF. And they said, hey, I want to put this back to top button in. And I said, well, you can, but a screen reader is going to hear it, which is not the end of the world, but it's going to interrupt content as it moves down the page. He said, well, can't we just hide that from the screen reader? I said, yeah, but you cannot hide a button because a button will create an untagged annotation. Yeah. So it's being able to start thinking about the extra design choices that you're going to make, how someone's going to interact with that document is so freeing once you get past the technical aspect of what do I need to do? How am I structuring my tags and kind of all of that? So going back to all of that, I think having the ability to use these tools, knowing that it's going to take me 3 seconds, literally no more than 15 seconds to remediate a table versus before, like maybe an hour for that same table to go in and restructure it and do all this stuff. Now I have time to think about other things. How do I want the text to sound in the table? What does the symbology sound like? Did I test the use of color? I've got red and green. Maybe I just did a table this week that was more likely and less likely, and the words were red and green, or they had red and green X's. Thinking about all of those design choices really lends itself to the user experience. And if you've listened to this podcast at all, you know that Chad and I are first user advocates for that user experience.
For sure. What you were just describing, Dax, I always call it technical creativity, right? Because remediation,
that's a great term.
Yeah. Like remediation is fundamentally a very technical process, but one of the things I love about it is how I'm able to be creative in my tag structure to achieve the result that I'm trying to give to the end user, and I find it fun. I know people are probably like, he is crazy, right? But I actually find enjoyment in it. I find it fun. So
I would have never thought I would say that, but I too find it fun. And I remember all the frustrations I had in the beginning where I was unsure of what I was doing. I didn't know if I was following the right rule. I'd read the WCAG principle and I'd get one thing out of it. One time I read it and the next time I'd catch some other phrase and I'm like, oh no, it's really saying this, or this is the way it should be done. And all of that was just so confusing. And now that I've really kind of been able to understand it all and really digest it all, it's just so fun, man.
Yeah.
I just love it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why we do the training, because we get to relearn or reteach all this stuff, every single day. Our next upcoming training is accessibility for Microsoft Word. And, one of the things that this class is going to talk about is how to structure your document, really how to design the elements within it to get a good user experience, to not have a heavy lift at the end, because we know accessibility at the end is always the worst case scenario. So if you're interested in joining that class, head on over to accessibilityunraveled.com. That class this podcast airs on Tuesday, and that class is on Thursday. So you will have just 2 days to go catch a spare seat at our class. And we've got some really great handouts, Chad, right?
Yeah, Dax. We have one of the handouts is kind of a walkthrough of the Microsoft Accessibility Checker, which is, the Microsoft Accessibility Checker it's very similar to the Acrobat Checker in that the idea there is to help you to catch a lot of the obvious problems that exist in your document, right? Missing alternate text, in the case of Word, merge table cells, things like that. And then we also give a checklist of things to pay attention to when you are creating accessible PDFs from Microsoft Word. Those should be really great takeaways for the attendees of this webinar.
Yeah, the Microsoft checklist is the Microsoft Word checklist is 2 pages, and it's literally talks about layout and formatting, images, tables, and other additional requirements. So it's got some really good information. It's a good handout for the class. I'm happy to have helped create it.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to talk about, Chad, is something that we talk about quite a bit on the show is when to know when you're done. What do you do? We always stress doing as much as we can in the source file before we go to PDF, but how do you make that decision? And there are lots of times where I know I've evaluated a document and said, okay, I'm not going to spend the next hour and a half restructuring or retagging these tables in InDesign so that I can just tag them again or manipulate them again in the PDF. I don't do any of that remediation in the InDesign document. I just wait for the PDF. And of course, the drawback to that is what the drawback there, right, Chad?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of drawbacks, right? I mean, God forbid the client comes back to you with a change and you now need to regenerate the PDF file. Right. All of that work that you did outside of InDesign now has to be redone again. Right.
Right.
And full disclosure, guys, Dax and I, we have discussions about this a lot, and one of the things we're talking about was literally related to a project, that we were working on. Right. And Dax kind of looked at me and was like, Chad, why are you spending all that time in InDesign? I would just spit out the PDF and, fix it, after the PDF is made. And we kind of, that's where this conversation kind of stemmed from, and Dax and I are really good that way. We love to hear each other's pros and cons. Right. And he explained that. I was like, hey, that does make a lot of sense, but on my end, one of the things that kind of kept me in InDesign was I needed to adjust the tag order. I needed to adjust the read order. And those were 2 things that I really did not want to fix after the PDF was made. Right.
Right. Well, and I think the biggest consideration for me is I look at the probability of change at the PDF stage. Right now, I am 100% for doing as much as you can inside the InDesign document when it's reasonably possible. I think about the amount of effort. Imagine here's a prime example: alt text inside InDesign. We all know there's an accessibility tab inside. When you make a URL, you can go to that accessibility tab and you can type in alt text. Well, the problem with that is that it takes time to go in there, right click on the URL, open the hyperlinks panel, paste in the thing, uncheck that stupid shared destinations box, and then move on to the next one, right? But I also know that if I go into PDF when I'm done and I just run the pre-flight fix-up to add content key entries to the link annotations, I've solved it in one click. Right. And I also know that NVDA and JAWS don't actually read the content key. They read the alt text. So it's one of those situations where technically trying to meet compliance causes me a lot of time. Yeah. Whereas if I want to make it usable, I probably will just go into the PDF and do it the other way because I'm going to get a better result and I don't have to do it twice. And the time it takes me to do it is substantially less.
Well, Dax, setting the contents key for a link annotation in InDesign, which, by the way, is accomplished by adding the alt text to the hyperlink, is currently a waste of time, right? Because as you and I have discussed in previous podcasts, JAWS and NVDA does not read the contents key of the link annotation. And this makes both of our heads explode, right, at this point in time, because when they added that feature to InDesign, they were adding the alt text for the hyperlink into the alt text field of the hyperlink.
Right.
And the standards people in the group
at PDFA, at PDF Association, regarding meeting PDF UA compliance. Yeah.
Right. They lost their minds. They said, that's wrong. That's the wrong place to put it. The correct place to put it is setting it in the contents key. So we're like, okay, understood. That makes sense. And so Adobe made the change. Adobe said, sorry, guys, our bad. We're going to make sure that it sets the contents key. Well, fast forward a few months, right?
Yep.
We're doing some testing and somebody says, why isn't my
alt text being read?
Contents key.
Yeah. Well, they said alt text.
Read.
Yeah.
Right. I know. And that gets confusing as we talk about it because they're two different things, but they kind of were being used interchangeably. But they're complaining like, okay, I spent all this time, I set the contents key, but when I read it using NVDA, it's not reading my text.
Yep.
And I think you and I tested it and
Yep.
we're like, crap, he's right.
Yeah.
Why isn't it reading the contents key? And only to discover that neither JAWS nor NVDA are honoring the contents key in a link annotation. However, it does honor the alt text, which is the whole irony of this discussion, because Adobe should have just left it go and they would have been fine,
Right.
But so yeah, it's comical, but I feel bad for Rob Haverty who made this change and accommodated the people who were up in arms about it, only to discover that, oh man, this doesn't work the way that it's intended to.
Well, and I will tell you that it might, in future releases of InDesign, it might get fixed here in short order. There are some changes coming to both PDF UA and to the way InDesign works. And so we might see some changes. But currently, if you want meaningful alt text to be displayed and to be voiced when someone either enters that item into the tags tree or gets to that item in the tags tree or mouses over it with their mouse inside the PDF, if you want that meaningful alt text to appear, you really cannot do it inside InDesign currently for hyperlinks. You have to do it in the alt text field inside inside Acrobat. So just know that that's a thing, and we wish that we could make a plugin for Acrobat, but that's a door that's just so locked to us. I can make scripts all day long for InDesign, but you try to make one for Acrobat, you need the SDK and a rocket science degree to make that all happen. And that's just not me. So
it's way above my pay grade, buddy. I wish sometimes I know there was a point in time in my career where I thought I wanted to be a programmer. Oh. And then I tried it and I'm like, none of this makes any sense to me. I mean, I think you got to be wired differently,
Well, what's interesting for me is I tried it and I loved it and I thought it was great, but I'm not perfect enough. I'll miss a period or put a slash the wrong way or miss a quote. And if you miss one quote at the end of one line in the wrong place, your script doesn't work. And it was so frustrating to me because like I get what's going on. I see how we're walking through this array and we're going to display the contents and here's how to do it. And I could never find my errors. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not perfect enough for this. I can't do it. And so I leave it to other folks smarter than me. So
absolutely. I mean, the closest I get to that, Dax, is I still teach from time to time Adobe Lifecycle and AEM Forms Designer, and that is all controlled by JavaScript.
Yeah.
And listen, I have stood there staring at a screen for an hour and a half, only to discover I was missing a semicolon.
Yeah. Oh, when this goes back, I'll tell you when I started doing this, Chad, was in the days of Flash. See, I started designing in Flash, and then Flash gave you those little action script buttons. And I started to rely on those buttons less and less because I was able to remember what the little snippet of code was to put it all together. And it got to a point where I was almost writing the action script without really having to do anything. But when it didn't work, I would go back, highlight the piece of text that I thought was the error or where it gave me the line number error. And I might go back and use the button. And then it would put the syntax in the right way. So that was kind of my delve into action scripts and where I thought maybe I wanted to be a programmer, but we digress. You know.
So all that to say, guys, you know, I guess what Dax and I are trying to just, you know, just kind of talking about and discussing is, you know, leverage the tools at your disposal. You always are going to have to make judgment calls. Right. I mean, Dax, you know, last week, you know, I did that. I did a 250 page InDesign document that was broken into 5 separate InDesign files. So I used the InDesign book feature. And, you know, you've got to make these judgment calls along the way of, you know, exactly what you were saying. It's like, what's the path of least resistance? Right. You know, like what's going to get me to where I need to be with the less amount of effort possible, right? And
well, the sample document you were working on, the one we were just discussing this morning, we had a catalog and it had a table, and the way it was designed is it was each object was in its own table, and really it was just a heading, an image, and 3 it could be really a list item, right? A 3 list item, and you and I talked about, well, do you export this to PDF and then create a, you know, in Common Look, you could just select that table and say layout table and you're done. In Made to Tag, you could select that table and say layout table and it would be done. You could just extract all that stuff right out, right? And so you start to use these other tools and it starts to change how you see whether to do it in the source, because really, if you were to spend the time to break all those things out of their tables and reset them all and make all new paragraph styles and do all that, you're talking about a couple of days worth of work for the entire catalog, hoping you don't make a mistake somewhere and maybe miss a SKU number or delete an extra character somewhere. You know, I mean, it creates a whole series of issues when you start editing a client's content. So yeah, I mean, those are all design decisions you have to make, and having the tools at hand help you make those decisions more informed, right?
And what's funny about that, Dax, because like when I saw those tables, I was like, oh man, like this is, because I think there's 300 tables in there. Right. And so the user experience is not going to be great because they're not going to be able to easily jump to where they want to go.
Right.
They're going to have to go next table. Well, no, let's be clear. Next table, read the first cell. Next table, read the first cell. That, you know what I mean? Like they're going to have to go through it that way. And so I rebuilt it simply using paragraphs, and I mimicked it perfectly. And when you export to PDF, the tag structure is beautiful.
Sure.
It's beautiful. It's a thing of beauty. It's like 3 paragraphs takes care of everything. Where it used to be this somewhat complicated table, it's now 3 beautiful tags. But to your point, I now got to go through the entire document and strip out the text of every table and reformat it the way that and you and I talked about it, and you're like, you know what, Chad, just make them layout tables.
Yeah.
Use made to tag, make them layout tables. I don't, and I think I'm pretty open about, I love made to tag, but there's things about it that I don't like. And when you make something a layout table, it creates this really complicated div structure.
Right.
That to kind of replicate what the table used to be. As you and I have said before, divs or container tags are not voiced. So you could pretty much ignore them. It's more that principle of, oh, I want the beautiful tag structure. For what reason? Does it benefit anybody?
Yeah.
Other than make me feel good at night when I go to sleep. You know what I mean?
Well, we hear that a lot about span tags. Do I need these span tags? Should I have span tags? Do I go in and clean up my span tags? Span tags don't matter, right? They're just a container to hold a property for that piece of text. I was thinking about this just now, Chad, for those layout tables, right? Going through and applying your paragraphs to the tables. You could highlight that entire section and say table to text, right? Because you've got in the table area, you've got convert text to table. You should be able to go the other direction with it and go convert table to text. And then you'd strip out all of your table stuff into paragraphs, right?
You're really close to being correct. The only thing that no, and I'm only saying this because you're absolutely right, Dax, and I wish you were right. The problem is when they built that table, they had a cell on the right side of the table that contains a photo.
Oh, okay.
Now I could probably run a find change and strip it out that way. So I'm not saying that you're wrong, but
are you saying that when you convert the table to text, that the image goes away?
No, you're going to have another tab with a inline figure in that text.
But wouldn't you want that if you had the catalog's title, then you had the image, and then you had the SKU and the other details for that, or the description and then the SKU? The image has got to go in there somewhere, right?
I wouldn't want it inline. I would want it anchored. And I would have to figure out if there's a way. Maybe I'd have to think about that.
Sure.
I'd have to think about
you
that.
You can see if there's a style.
Yeah. You're absolutely on the right track. I just feel like that's going to be a little bit of a hang up, but probably could save a ton of time. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and again, this is what we do, guys. This is about talking through those issues. And if you are lucky enough to have an accessibility team, it's more than, and for those of you who are just lone wolves out there, I know your pain. I'm with you. Believe me, consider me your invisible second person, because I've been there when I'm the only person. But if you've got a team of people to sit and noodle through stuff with, it's great. And honestly, that's what the PDF Accessibility Facebook group is. Go join that group if you're not part of it already, and you can noodle with the 2,800 people that are all passionate. And I will say, we have 2,800 members. We probably have 200 active members, like posting every day, all the time on stuff,
responding, answering questions. Yeah.
It's not a bunch of lurkers. I mean, there are some, but that's just the way it goes. Some people just like to look at the answers rather than reply, which I totally get. But it's not a group where you have to wait 3 days for an answer. I've been on some groups. I belong to a couple of other groups, like for fish and blacksmithing and some other stuff. And sometimes you post something online and it's 3 or 4 days before you get an answer to anything, because the group's not very active. We have a very active group. So Chad, today is Tuesday the 27th, right? When this podcast is going to air. And by this time, if you're listening to this podcast, it's likely that we have just finished up our 5 ways to get your team on board with accessibility. Now, if we post this podcast sometimes around midnight Pacific Standard Time, so that people in the UK and Australia and everywhere else can get access to it during their daylight hours. So if you're fortunate enough to get to that podcast early, you can go over and register on our website, accessibilityunraveled.com, for the 5 ways to get your team on board with accessibility. But if you missed it, you can go watch the recording on our YouTube channel. So if you go onto YouTube and search Accessibility Unraveled, you'll be able to find our YouTube channel and a recording of this webinar. We have about 80 people signed up for the webinar right now, which is pretty decent. So I'm looking
awesome.
forward to it.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about those 5 ways that, and one of the ways I think is one that I think a lot of people fall into the trap of not doing. And I think that I'll be really excited to talk about that one. So go take a listen or go sign up or take a listen, whatever time zone you're in, do the action that is appropriate.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, the other place that we're going to be at, Chad, is Adobe Max, right? We've got Adobe Max coming up, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you and I are both going to be out there in LA.
Right. And my session is on accessibility for all of or most of the Adobe programs that have accessibility components in them. So InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere, After Effects, and some social media stuff too. So I'm excited to be able to present this kind of overview of how you can make your content in general more accessible. So I'm really excited about that. And Chad, you're going to be there out in the exhibitors area, right? You're going to be out there hanging out with Made to Tag?
I am. Exeo asked me to come and help them promote Made to Tag at Adobe Max. And so I'm looking forward to hanging out with Corinna at Exeo and just showing people, why Made to Tag is such a cool product.
Yeah, it really is such a time saver. So my session is on Wednesday, October 19th. So if you've registered online, Wednesday the 19th, my session is S as in Sam 6340, and it is Learn How to Design for Accessibility. And would love to have you in my class. Give me a big shout out in the chat if you end up being in there. We love you guys, and thank you guys so much.
It's going to be a great session, Dax. I mean, to put all of the accessibility features in all those Adobe programs in one place is just going to be fantastic. And I'm sure you're going to cover some social media in there as well.
Yeah. This is going to be an overview. There won't be a deep dive into anything specific, but just so that people are aware, I bet when I said Photoshop earlier, a bunch of eyebrows raised because who thinks about accessibility in Photoshop? But there is definitely accessibility. And we're going to talk about a new feature in Bridge that is super exciting. And in fact, we are going to have a special, we're going to have a special podcast guest on here talking about that very feature. So stay tuned for that. And Chad, you're going to have a bunch of our new handouts, right? Over at the booth for Made to Tag, our new postcards that we have, right?
Absolutely. We just ordered them. And if you want to pick up one of our postcards to have as a reference at your desk, while you're remediating your little heart out, stop by the Exeo booth at Adobe Max 2022, and we will make sure you get one.
Yeah, because on one side, it's all the NVDA shortcuts that are the basic ones that you need to know without being overwhelmed. And then on the other side of the card is a reference sheet of like an LI, what's an LI tag and what's a TOCI and what is an LBL tag. And it's kind of a list of all the tags or the most of the major tags and kind of what they mean. So it's a really good reference to kind of have at your desk just to be able to understand what's what. So we're looking forward to it. And I hope I see you guys there. It is Max with Dax. Every year I do this whole thing where we do this kind of where's Dax at Max. So I'm excited about that.
All right, guys. Well, once again, we want to thank Chax Training and Consulting for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training or struggling to establish an accessibility program within your organization, head over to accessibilityunraveled.com to learn more. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.